All right, welcome to today's news live. That um, we didn't just arrive just this
we
second.
couldn't even do our 5 minutes of pre-show private banter because I just barreled in looking like an unmade bed.
And you know what, Michael? You never look like that. That's not a look that you favor.
I know 2 or 3 times a year I'll like put in the effort so that I can look at least 30% presentable. But if I'm just at home and I'm just doing stuff on the computer, why bother?
The one really humorous. First of all, hello everybody. The little sub note to this whole thing that happened at the Substack party was the sticker for your size on your chinos. I'm so glad
Okay.
that happened to you and not me, because
That's
I've done
happened to
that
me. I'm
many.
sure that's happened to me before, actually, because you know what? Sometimes I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of laundry that I would hypothetically have to do or dry cleaning. That I'm like,
Right.
okay, I got a specific event coming up. I'm just going to order like 2 new pairs of clothes. And so I did not study, and I'm like I knew there was a possibility I would have to go. I would be going to maybe some brunch style events that are spring themed. So I wanted some of the pastel colors, and that was a bad move.
Mhm.
I should have just shown up in the hoodie on Saturday and not even attempted to wear any kind of professional clothing because it backfired on me as usual. But now I'm just going to claim that the leaving on one of the more hidden tags on one of the pant legs, that was actually a deliberate fashion choice.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Is it like, because I know people
yeah,
do that with hats. They leave the
yeah.
thing
That's
on.
getting big in the New York fashion scene.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like on the runway, like Charlie. I saw Charlie XCX doing that.
I've actually given a speech standing up in front of a whole room of people at a union with my fly down. So
Oh yeah, oh
nothing
yeah. Don't
nothing can
even
be
get me
worse than
started on
that.
that. But you know how people knew about the tag that was left on the pant leg? It was because Tara Palmieri, that
Yeah,
was like sneaking around surreptitiously filming me.
yeah.
Which fine. I mean, she didn't get anything scandalous on camera. So if you wanted,
You got that though. You got to
you
give
want
her.
to, she wasn't aiming for that. Of course, all the internet sleuths zoomed in on it
Mm-hmm.
and they caught me. So I admit it. I should have brought my mom down there with me so she could dress me properly.
I think that would be better. From now on, Michael Tracy should have mom in tow.
Some woman should have come down and dressed me. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. All right. A lot has happened. We're going to get to some of the aftermath of this somehow still
Day
smoldering.
day 5 or 6 now. And look, I'm not trying to milk this story for all it's worth, although maybe I am. But there are actually there are actually some larger themes that are worth pointing to that don't have to do specifically with my little annoying personal journey
Yeah.
in terms of how the media works and like these weird hierarchies that get subtly ingrained into even the new media or independent media, and how you could just freely lie and distort at will, and like if you're understood to be lying and distorting about a baddie with a capital B, anything goes. And so that has import beyond the peculiarities of my little turmoil.
Yeah, there were some particularly graphic examples of that this week, but we'll get to that later. Let's get
That's
to
for the paid subscribers who are just not going to be getting any paid content on this stream.
right. Yeah, well, we're doing this live, so it's
Doing it live. Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah,
Bill O'Reilly actually has a podcast now, of course, like everybody. And he, I think, commendably has called it, "We'll Do It Live." That's the name of the long form podcast.
It should be called "Fuck It, Let's Do It Live." But
I don't think he says "fuck it." It's just "We'll do it live," and you could fill in the "fuck it."
I knew Bill as a kid. He worked
Really?
at my dad's TV station. Yeah, for a little bit
In Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, an old clip of Bill will pop up from one of the random local TV stations he was at. Like I saw some clip of him in Texas where he's covering, what was it? It was some he was covering like an old law where you can't you can't dance inside Dallas city limits past a certain time of night or something.
Oh, it's like Footloose. Yeah.
He's just doing a little segment on that, like when he's like 30 and he's got the big hair and everything. How did you get along with him?
No, nobody did. He had it. Well, it wasn't his politics back then. It's a whole separate discussion. But there were issues with let's just say some other things that he would do, like in live shots. He would hog airtime a little bit more than.
Oh, I'm shocked.
So it was that kind of thing.
Is he one of the guys that your dad fought back in the day?
No, he was not one of those guys. My dad fought other folks. I didn't witness any of those though, so I shouldn't.
I know you got to memorialize those. Do some kind of oral history. Well, I want to hear about your dad's journo brawling in the 70s.
My dad did a little bit of brawling. He was a little bit of
loose cannon.
He was a loose cannon. But
as any good journalist should be.
Turned into a fine gentleman. So, all right, let's look at SOT 2, which is ABC's special report on I would say a pretty significant Supreme Court decision this week.
This is an ABC News special report.
And we should let it roll for a little bit, because the correspondent, the first analyst, comes to a point that is kind of interesting. So let's just keep going.
The Supreme Court has just released a major decision which could have a profound impact on the midterm elections. The justices issuing a ruling on a case out of Louisiana involving the Voting Rights Act, redistricting, and whether states must end any consideration of race when redrawing congressional maps. The decision potentially reducing the influence of minority voters and minority representation in Congress. Let's get right to our senior Washington correspondent, Devin Dwyer, who covers the Supreme Court for us. Devin.
Kira, this decision is 6-3, written by Justice Samuel Alito, and it's a significant decision and a setback for the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was passed to guarantee equality in how we vote. And of course, addressing the systemic and historic racial discrimination, especially across the South. This decision came in a case out of Louisiana involving a court-ordered drawing addition of a second majority Black district in that state because of the size of the state's population. And the Supreme Court today, in this decision, said that the court violated the 14th Amendment by adding, the state rather, violated the 14th Amendment by adding that district. They used race impermissibly, consciously, to add a second district to aid those voters. And they said that is simply not allowed under our Constitution. Justice Samuel Alito didn't go as far as saying race can never be used in drawing these maps. That's something the court has affirmed before to comply with the Voting Rights Act, but he put a significant new limit on how courts can order states to draw their maps to be more equitable. He said that Section 2 imposes liability only when evidence supports a strong inference that the state intentionally drew its map to discriminate. So a setback for minority voters in Louisiana. And now, Kira, the impact of this decision is going to start to ripple across the country.
Let's talk about that impact and bring in our legal contributor and law professor at Hofstra University, James Sample. I mean, James, this is clearly, gutting landmark legislation here.
Absolutely correct, Kira. This is a ruling that almost completely constitutionalizes a color blindness principle, to the point that even race-conscious remedies designed to remedy racial discrimination are unconstitutional under the very amendments, the 14th and 15th Amendments, that the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were designed to make real and manifest in the country. So this is a diametrical shift in voting rights practices, a diametrical shift in the area of race and racial discrimination and the remedies for racial discrimination.
James, thanks. Let's bring in Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce. Now, Mary,
we can stop there. All right. So
my man Samuel Alito laying it down again, fellow native of West Caldwell, New Jersey. Shout out to Phil and Laura.
Is he
Alito.
a native of West Caldwell, New Jersey?
I mean, he's a native of Trenton, I believe, but
Oh.
he lived in he and his family were from West Caldwell, New Jersey, where I'm from originally. So I went to
Interesting.
school with the elite. I didn't even know that Laura Alito, who was in my grade for years, that we vaguely knew that her dad was some kind of judge, maybe, but I had no idea what that even meant. And then all of a sudden, boom, senior year of high school, we find out that George W. Bush has nominated Samuel Alito to replace Harriet Miers, who was the victim of a Republican revolt in the Senate. I don't know if you recall that whole ordeal.
I actually don't. What did they get her on?
So in 2005, George W. Bush nominated. Sorry, his first nomination was John Roberts. George W. Bush had no Supreme Court nominations in his first term, from 2001 to 2005. So conservatives, Federalist Society types were getting angsty because normally a president will get at least one nominee for a vacancy in a full term, but it's all sort of random. It depends on just the lifespans of particular justices. But then he gets reelected, and finally the big chance comes to nominate the replacement for Rehnquist, who the Supreme Court, the justice who dies in office. That's John Roberts. It's unclear whether conservatives are getting what they really wanted with John Roberts, but they're willing to tolerate it. But then the next one comes around, right? And that is the Sandra Day O'Connor, I think, vacancy, who retires. And conservatives are chagrined because Reagan nominated her as the first woman Supreme Court justice, and she turned out to be more of a quote unquote moderate, or not a doctrinaire, hardline, ideologically sort of rigorous conservative, which is what they wanted. So she didn't vote the right way on the abortion rulings. I think it was I'm forgetting the name of the one now in the 90s. It was like the add-on to the Roe versus Wade decision that kind of recodified it in the 90s. So they're all upset and they want to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. But Bush nominates his just friend from back in Texas, Harriet Miers, who's basically just like a senior advisor, I think, in the White House. Really did not have any kind of established legal record or jurisprudential history. And he has to withdraw that nomination because Republicans in the Senate eventually sound their objections enough that he gives in and then appoints somebody who really is in the sweet spot for the conservative legal community, which is Samuel Alito, who happened to be from West Caldwell, New Jersey. I attended his CCD classes, like the Catholic education classes.
Wow.
And I was on the tennis team with Phil, Laura I was friends with. And, we just got blown away all of a sudden one day where he was nominated by Bush, and his kids had to be summoned to DC. So they were absent. And all of a sudden we see like Laura on the news then. And I was like, wait, what? Like she's standing there with George Bush. It was pretty crazy. And, my claim to fame is that Samuel Alito did what I think must have been his first interview of any kind, first or maybe only interview of any kind between when he was nominated by Bush and then when he took office as Supreme Court Justice, because that happened to coincide with my being in an AP government and politics class with Laura in our senior years. So he came in just for the day and just talked to the class, right? And of course, I'm so obnoxious. I monopolized the whole class, asking him questions about like stare decisis and stuff, and then like running home as soon as I could to like write it down on my my old Dell computer because there was no way to record it at the time, but I still have the notes. Anyway, so that's my little tie-in with Samuel Alito. We're both somehow notable people on the West Caldwell, New Jersey Wikipedia page, which doesn't say much for West Caldwell that I'm even on there, but there you have it.
That is very interesting background. Well, okay, so this is actually a fascinating case, one that I think people will have differing feelings about, depending. It won't be straight down partisan lines on this one, I don't think, even though it was in the Supreme Court. So let's just start with acknowledging that there has been a problem with gerrymandering and redistricting for a while. There were the sort of redistricting wars in the after the 2010 census, right? what were the states that had the problems? I'm trying to remember.
After the 2010 census,
Yeah, there were
no,
like,
because that was a big Republican wave year, right? So
yeah, there were
so like Wisconsin, Michigan, I think it probably
Wisconsin,
would have
yeah,
been
right, and then the
places that are kind of like swingish states, but went Republican in 2010. So then the Republican governors and state legislatures try to pull out all the stops to kind of consolidate power for the next decade, and Democrats do the same thing, obviously, when they get a chance. But
yeah, no, they
it's just
did
the tit for tat.
They did the same thing even that year. There were, if I remember correctly, it was Pennsylvania, right? No, I'm sorry. Pennsylvania was Republicans. There was Maryland, Illinois, California moved to a
Like a commission or something.
A commission, which is probably where a lot of these things are headed.
Because that was that and California, obviously, they're so referendum heavy, meaning ballot initiatives, that I think they were able to sell that idea to the voters. So you're almost with the idea being you're almost taking away the redistricting authority from the politicians, which is a pretty easily saleable concept. But Matt, you say this has been a problem for a long time. Do you know the genesis of the term gerrymandering?
No.
That would be Elbridge Gerry, who was the vice president, if I'm not mistaken. Vice president of the United States from 1813 to 1814. And that term was coined because when he was governor of Massachusetts from 1810 to 1812, he tried to devise like a random arbitrary district in Boston for his allies' political advantage. So it's been a problem for, not since 2010, but since like 1810.
Right. Yeah, but no, in recent history that this has kind of come back up. There have been increasingly aggressive attempps to redraw the map.
Yeah, because part of why is that as U.S. politics has gotten increasingly nationalized, where there's no like regional idiosyncrasies anymore. Like you used to have West Virginia Democrats who could get elected cycle after cycle after cycle, or you would have like some Northeastern Republicans who could get elected even in Vermont or something. That's mostly gone. Like Susan Collins is the last remnant of that, and she's probably going to lose this year to this Plattner fellow. But as this polarization has taken effect, there's more of an incentive for the parties to consolidate their power wherever it's concentrated, because there's no even notion that there could be some like partisan variegation in certain states that maybe don't go totally in accordance with what the national trends are. And then Joe Manchin was like the last relic of that too, which is why he had to retire this last cycle rather than even attempt to seek a re-election in West Virginia.
And a related downstream effect of this is that as the parties have consolidated their power and sort of tweaked the districting, we have fewer and fewer every year competitive districts.
Yeah, I hate this trend.
So when I first started covering this, I did a story about this for Rolling Stone like 15 or 20 years ago. I remember being shocked by the number. It was something like 83% of districts, had historically had been won by more than 5 points, right? And now that number is even higher. I think in the last election cycle, it was in the 90s.
Another reason why I hate this is because it blandly homogenizes U.S. politics even more than it already is. So we don't have that regional variegation anymore, where you can have this like idiosyncratic political tendency that is unique to a particular area of the country, like the quintessential West Virginia Democrats. Not that they were without problems, but it was sort of like, emblematic of whatever the political dynamics were in that locality. But now it's just kind of washed over into this overwhelming nationalized trend. Because like if we're gonna have a two-party system,
Staten Island Democrats is another one.
Yeah. Actually, Staten Island is mostly represented by a Republican right now. But
but by registration, it's overwhelmingly Democrat.
Staten Island is.
Mm-hmm.
Is it still okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have like you almost that's almost like a
Or it was.
holdover.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'm not sure about. I have to go check. It's definitely higher than Republican registration than any other borough. And there was a flip, I think, in 2018 with this guy Max Rose, who's like one of these, tough guy military recruit people that the DCCC wanted to put in every competitive race, and it actually was successful, like the CIA gang. He was in there for 2 years, but then it flipped back to Nicole Maliotakis, who's a Republican. So she's Staten Island and in like southern Brooklyn, like Bay Ridge. So that's like an example of something. Okay, so New York City. I mean, do you want literally every elected official in New York City to just be a down the line Democrat? Probably not. You probably want a little bit of competition, a little bit of I don't know, creative energy. So Nicole Maliotakis, I don't have that much of an issue with her representing Staten Island and southern Brooklyn. In fact, it's probably better than like just some generic Democrat who gets in there through some party selection process in like Kings County and then never has to worry about a competitive race again in his or her entire life. And likewise, you maybe you want like there still to be, I don't know, some Democrats in Florida. You want there to be some Democrats in like California, some Republicans in California, and go on down the list. Otherwise, everything just gets so tediously homogenized, which is what this latest redistricting battle, where it's like one state going after the next. Virginia just had that referendum where they approved new Democrat favorable congressional districts after Texas did a version of that in favor of the Republicans, and then California did in favor of the Democrats, and Trump wanted Indiana to do it, and then he wanted to primary the state senators who wouldn't go along with it. I mean, it's so tedious, and it's for no higher purpose than just raw partisan power that people then graft these like highfalutin bogus principles onto, which makes it even more annoying.
Okay. Yes and no. I disagree a little bit on that, but absolutely, both parties have been, appealing to the courts, doing whatever they can to try to beef up their representation.
But what do you disagree with?
Well, I think there is a highfalutin principle involved in this one. I think it's a complicated one. So,
this court case, yes. I mean, the Supreme Court decision. I'm talking about like the larger redistricting sort of shenanigans.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a higher principle at stake in this Supreme Court case.
Yeah. So, just to give like some personal background, like when I wrote the book about the Eric Garner case, I had to meet lawyers who, going back decades, had worked to get race out of the law, right? Sometimes risking their lives, right? They had gone to rural Arkansas to desegregate communities that had bricks thrown at them, right? And this was the driving concept in sort of American liberalism in the 60s.
These are like New York Jewish lawyers, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they would go into these places and they would try to, take out laws that said that X schools had to be black and you couldn't send black students here, blah blah blah. Just had to be race neutral. And that concept held for a significant period of time. Like the idea of removing race from the law, that was once considered progressive. Then there was a kind of a shift in the political temperature starting in the 2000s, 2010s, and we started to see these concepts of, well, we have to do the law has to be tweaked in some cases to address historical or cultural inequities. Some of the more controversial cases, right, involve things like, which communities will get the first access to COVID vaccine, right? Remember, there were some cases involving that. So
remember DeSantis got attacked because he was prioritizing the elderly.
Right, exactly. Which is exactly, by the way, what they should have done.
Exactly. Yeah. Meaning he was prioritizing the cross-racial elderly in Florida of all places, rather than laser focus on disadvantaged minority communities, as though like a 21-year-old black guy should have had priority over an 85-year-old white woman.
Right.
Didn't make a lot of sense.
So this districting case what's the name? What's the name of the case? Hang on a minute. It's
I admit I have not read this week's case, but I remember reading there was
Louisiana v. Calais.
Yeah. There was sort of a precursor case that I do remember reading from, I think it was 2013. Remember, Shelby County versus Holder, which was about the constitutionality of certain provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is why I'm not sure I totally buy. I'm not, the idea that all of a sudden in the 2010s, suddenly race neutrality was tossed aside in favor of a new, activist incubated ideology that actually put a premium on racial characteristics. I'm not sure that's quite right. Because what was the whole purpose of the Voting Rights Act of 1965? It was to impose a federal backstop so that states could not, according to the supporters of the law, like LBJ and so forth, states could not unduly
discriminate.
Thwart the ability of blacks to obtain political power by using the mechanisms of state governance to marginalize them more or less. And a lot of those measures that were used to legitimately marginalize blacks, like poll taxes, those were technically race neutral. Like the poll tax laws did not say blacks are hereby forbidden from voting unless they can pay a certain tax. That was obviously the intended outcome, but it was mostly, in my recollection, constructed race neutrally, with the idea being that the ones, overwhelmingly the ones who aren't going to be able to pay the poll taxes are blacks, with some poor whites thrown in, but that was fine for the people who wrote the laws, because they knew that proportionally it would mean that blacks would be inhibited from gaining political power in the genuine Deep South, Alabama, and Mississippi and so forth, in the genuine. In the era of American history where that genuinely was a political project for the white, ruling class, so to say, in the Deep South.
Yeah, I guess though, but the overwhelming principle of the Voting Rights Act, and the most of the laws that came afterward were anti-discriminatory. The idea was, the way we talk about the way we're going to address race in legislation and in laws from now on is to prohibit consideration of it to favor one over the other, right? And that was a principle that mostly held for a while.
But Matt, you need it. But Matt, there was necessary racial consciousness to assess whether the voting districts were drawn in such a way in the Deep South to prevent blacks from having adequate political representation.
And that still holds even in this ruling.
Which I don't even think is necessary. I mean, I'm not even defending that on the merits anymore. I think you could just kind of get rid of the whole paradigm at this point, or at least you ought to. You should aspire to. Some people don't even aspire to. I'm just saying that was the logic of 1965. So I'm not sure I totally buy the idea that there was race neutrality as a consensus agreement principle, and then only in the 2010s.
I thought that was the aspiration. I mean, I think that if you went back and
I mean,
certainly
Martin Luther King famously, that was the speech. I have a dream that one day my children not be judged by the color of their skin, etc.
Right, and then the sort of switching out for equality, for equity, that kind of thing. It hasn't. For instance, that was in the background of the Loudoun County case, the controversy, where there was a sort of a gifted student program, right? And the problem was that the town intervened because all the South Asian kids were dominating that the program, and it was decided that they had to redo the admissions so that a proportional number of each group would get into those programs, and that created all kinds of hostility, right? And so with this one, let's sort of what exactly is the background? They added, when did they add that second district, the 2020 in Louisiana?
I'm not sure. I should have done more prep on that decision. But just one more thing though, on sort of the historical backdrop of this. The reason that right-wing sort of legal thinkers have been opposed to the civil rights laws of the 1960s for ages, not just since the 2010s, but for ages, is that they posited, I mean, read Richard Hanania on this, who's like sort of a weird guy ideologically, hard to pin down, but he's originated on the right for sure, and definitely on the racially conscious right, alt-right-ish. And he had a book called The Origins of Woke, which was actually pretty influential in the first year of the second Trump administration, where they were sort of using some of the arguments as the basis for the executive orders and so forth that would root out institutionalized DEI. And Hanania's whole point is that you can't just stop at DEI. That all stems from or springs from the legal framework that was institutionalized by the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, because they effectively instituted racial preferences on behalf of blacks, not colorblindedness, even if that might have been like the rhetorical selling point, but pro minority racial institutionalized policy. And so you had to uproot the whole underbelly of it in order to actually do away with woke. That's the argument anyway, and that's an argument that has pretty long-standing genesis in the right. So I think the people who are the most incensed by what they see as undue racial preferences imposed by the federal government to advantage blacks that has now just been partially overruled by the Supreme Court, they would disagree with you, because they think, no, it's actually got to go back to the 1960s. Despite the patina of racial race neutrality, it was all about pretty much arbitrarily hoisting up the blacks because the liberals were race guilty, and like the 60s radicals had taken over and had infiltrated the civil rights movement and got LBJ to do their bidding, etc.
Yeah, no, I remember going to one of the early Tea Party meetings, which was in like a suburban county in New York State, and they were protesting the fact that the federal government was going to build low-income housing in their town, right? And the essence of their complaint was that sort of it goes against American principles that we all moved here to get away from the city, right? And
white flight.
Yeah, no, but this was pretty far out of the city, right? It was not just it
was like Rockland County or Onega.
Yeah, something like that. It was more in the direction of Albany. I can't remember exactly where, but and so there are different ways of thinking about this. Like, is it absolutely necessary to make every county in the country, part of the project of providing low-income housing to, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't think any of these things are easy questions.
I mean, I'm not unsympathetic to that argument, actually. I don't think there's some inherent virtue in empowering the federal government to micromanage all these aspects of how we organize society from on high, when they're sort of marinating in these weird ideological fads that kind of can change on a dime. Given the political or cultural or algorithmic now, dynamics. So I'm not unsympathetic with that at all. I mean, I think there was a famous line, and not a famous line. I don't even know why I remember this, but Jonah Goldberg, the guy formerly of the National Review, one of the early political bloggers. I just remember him saying, I think it was around the 2010 actually, that they're talking about like problems within the conservative movement on some early podcast, Blogging Heads, I think, with Bob Wright. He was like, yeah, we don't like, us guys in the conservative movement, because he was still in good standing at that point. This is well pre-Trump. Us guys in the conservative movement, we can find oftentimes libertarians to be annoying, but you always want one of them in the room, because they're always going to be sort of looking at the underlying principle as to exertions of government power. And I think that's kind of right. And I think there's nothing even inherently right-wing about having that tendency.
Yeah. No, I agree. And this Louisiana case is, look, that second district that they built, that they drew, it's almost impossible to argue that this is not a racially drawn district.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, um, are we going to end the era of districts like that? Because both parties have taken advantage, or have used that tactic to.
Yeah, I mean, the tit for tat that is now being sort of proposed in Florida as a retaliation for the Virginia redistricting referendum.
By the way,
Basically,
it's the green here for people who are looking.
I mean, pull up the congressional maps in Maryland. There's one district that's particularly insane. That I think that is pretty old in its origins. Like Maryland is the one thing that the Pod Save America guys will concede that Democrats have done some cynical gerrymandering too. They'll point to Maryland because it
was 2011 they added one that was like totally nuts.
Yeah, and then they shunt out the one Republican, Andy Harris, to like the far west that like borders West Virginia. So anyway, I just find the whole thing depressing, and I think most of the time there really is no underlying principle in terms of just like this, again, tit for tat. Virginia does it, now Florida's got to do it because Texas did it, and then Illinois wants to do it or whatever. That I find just sort of pure tedium in the sense that there really is no higher principle at stake other than raw exercises in political power, which I guess is what politics is. But on the idea of racial consciousness, at least as it relates to this Voting Rights Act decision, yeah, I mean, I think there's I think the liberals, the legal liberal, the philosophical legally liberals are the ones who are kind of just sort of obstinate and unwilling to like reevaluate anything decades after the fact, when the whole premise behind those laws in the 1960s were supposed to be that they were time limited or that they were not indefinite, meaning that they would be subject to reevaluation with changing times and changing attitudes. And I think, there has been a big change in racial attitudes in the United States. I know we were all told that we were, headed back to chattel slavery in 2020. Despite having a black president for 8 years and so forth. But it's on the ground when you talk to people, it's mostly bogus. Yeah, there are still, go talk to black people. They will still have particularized grievances around their perceived mistreatment that I think have some legitimacy in the main. But in terms 100%. Of how that especially with the cops, but in terms of how that manifests, in terms of like some kind of political choice, in terms of like who's going to represent what particular precinct. I mean, this is ridiculous. So the Republicans, I guess the Republicans actually did make a concerted effort to get lots of women and minorities into their fold. And it's been pretty effective. For a while, Ben Carson, remember this? Mm. Ben Carson was leading the Republican primary polls in October of 2015.
Yeah.
And in the cycle prior to that, 2012, Herman Cain, for a while, was leading nationally the Republican primary polls for president of the United States, because Republican primary voters love them some, sermonizing, black preacher talk around what proper morality is, pull up your pants, go to church, etc. So there's no racial animus that's inhibiting them from supporting those types of people. They love it. So, I mean, just like take some solace in that, I guess, if you actually want some bona fide change in racial attitudes. But if you're just stuck in this, inertia of a Civil Rights Act of 1965 paradigm, then, you're the one who I think is a little bit too stubborn.
I remember I was actually covering the primaries at that time. And, Carson was the last person to be in the lead who wasn't Donald Trump that year. And, and his candidacy got knocked off its axis by the release of that weird video when he was talking about the pyramids as grain storage facilities when he gave that speech.
And Trump started like gently going after him, in his joking way, because obviously, he wanted to keep Carson sort of on his side. But there was a week or so where he's like, all right, I got to go after Ben a little bit because he's just abandoned me.
Remember there was that whole thing about stabbing.
Ben. That's what I was going to say. Ben Carson like wrote in his book or something that when he was a kid, he attacked his mother with a knife or with a wrench or some pretty hardcore object. It was a knife. Yeah. And Trump's like, I don't know if we want somebody who attacked their own mother with a knife, do we? I mean, I'm sure he's a great guy. You know, he's a brilliant guy, neurosurgeon, whatever, but attacking him with a knife. Like I never attacked my mother with a knife. Like Trump actually said that, I remember.
Yeah. And look, that worked. All right. So
did you see his quote? Did you see his quote yesterday? This is great. This is why. Okay, so I take back everything I said like a couple weeks ago on our "Is Trump Still Funny" conversation, because the answer is unequivocally yes. Here's what he said. He was asked by a reporter about wearing a bulletproof vest going forward after Saturday's incident, the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And he said, "quote I don't know if I can handle looking 20 pounds heavier."
He's got a point. All right. Well, let's look at some of the reactions to this. Let's go to number one, SOT 1. This is Yvette Clarke of the Congressional Black Caucus blasting the SCOTUS decision. And then we'll go to 3 after that with Hakeem Jeffries.
We did not become a truly multiracial democracy until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 enforced the 15th Amendment, because Black Americans demanded the right to be seen, heard, and counted. That progress was paid for in blood, in sacrifice, and in unbreakable resolve. And now, 60 years later, we are watching that progress be ripped away. With its decision in Louisiana v. Calais, the Supreme Court has opened the door to a coordinated attack on Black voters across this country. This is an outright power grab. It's about silencing Black voices.
Who's this woman?
Mantling majority.
This is Yvette Clarke from the Congressional
and
Black
rigging
Caucus.
the map so that politicians can choose their voters instead of the other way around. We have seen this before.
My deranged buddy Al Green.
We know exactly what this leads to, and we will not go back.
Let's listen to Hakeem Jeffries. For a limited amount of time.
Yeah, give us like 10
illegitimate Supreme Court majority strikes a blow against the Voting Rights Act and is designed to undermine the ability of communities of color all across this country to elect their candidate of choice.
How is the
Supreme Court majority illegitimate? We're here
browsing about Merrick Garland.
I guess that would be.
I think that must be what it is. They're still grousing about Merrick Garland in 2016 not being voted on when he was nominated by Obama after Scalia died. So for the past 10 years, the Supreme Court has been illegitimate. And I thought we're supposed to revere our institutions and norms.
Well, yeah, the argument being that the Republicans ignored the norms, and
that's true.
2016,
which they did.
Yeah, which they did. Yeah.
Came out earlier today. It's an unacceptable decision, but not an unexpected decision, because this isn't even really the Roberts Court. It's the Trump Court.
Yes.
And what we would expect from the Trump Court is an effort to continue their scheme to suppress the vote and rig the midterm elections and beyond. Because these extremists have failed America in every possible way. They failed on the economy. They failed on healthcare. They're failing as it relates to this reckless and costly war of choice. The extremists have completely and totally failed America.
That's right.
So they've concluded, aided and abetted by the Trump court, that they have to cheat to win.
Yes.
All right.
The Trump court, Trump is constantly putting out these wild screeds bashing his own Supreme Court justices that he nominated.
Yeah, I know.
3 of them in his first term, because they won't go along with whatever he wants on any given day. He thought that they would actually just be so loyal to Trump, even though they have a lifetime appointment. And he's mad at the Federalist Society for recommending Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, I guess, especially, for not just like mindlessly ruling in the way that Trump wants. But it's the Trump court? No, it's not. It's the Roberts Alito Thomas court.
And I hate that performative thing where they're that it's the whole
Yeah, you know what this remember in 2021, I think it was, where all the Democrats, I think including Biden himself, came out and like very sternly and melodramatically declared that like some tweak to the voting laws in Georgia was the Jim Crow 2.0 because of like some voter ID requirement, which like I'm sort of agnostic about on the merits, but like whatever the impact, it was not like some egregious, crisis in like racial tyranny. And like then when the data came in about, voting patterns post the enactment of that law, it had no effect whatsoever. But like, and didn't like the MLB have to move their All-Star game or something out of Atlanta because of that?
Yeah. Yep. There's also, this isn't a hugely significant story, but it's part of it. There's a presumption by everybody that white people are going to vote for Republicans and the blacks are going to vote for Democrats, but it's actually bled in the opposite directions for a couple of cycles now. And this just I saw this Harry Enton, the former 536.com pollster. 538.
Nate Silver would be so disappointed in you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I as a former baseball prospectus contributor, I apologize to Nate.
Oh, were you really?
I was, yeah.
Moneyball Matt.
Yeah. So this was, I thought, just a little bit interesting that this just came out.
After the Supreme Court's decision, here's that moment.
When did it come out? Just now?
No, it came out this morning, but basically very much narrows the Voting Rights Act.
Was it considered a win for who?
A win for Republicans.
I love it.
CNN's chief data analyst Harry Enton running the numbers.
That's all he has to hear.
Harry, let's kind of baseline it for everyone right now. How is the president doing right now with African-American voters, with black voters now versus this point in the first term?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now in the numbers is President Trump and the Republican Party are chipping away at the long-term advantage that Democrats have had with black voters, with African Americans. You can see it right here. Look, Trump's approval among African Americans at this point in term one, he was at 12%. He's been losing ground with a lot of people. He's gaining.
And they're young black men.
With African Americans, he's up to 16% at this point. And you say, this isn't that big of a shift. But I will tell you, Republicans absolutely love this shift that's going on because Democrats have had such a long-term advantage. The fact that he's actually gaining ground versus where he was in term number one, this has major implications for elections down the line because Democrats, especially in a lot of these tight races, you talk about places like Georgia, right down in the South, you see this type of movement for Trump actually gaining ground. This could have major ramifications and help put Republicans over the top in a number of southern places in the midterm elections.
But do you see this as part of a bigger trend?
I see this as absolutely part of a bigger trend. Donald Trump's Republican Party is absolutely gaining ground, not just him gaining in terms of his approval rating, but look at the party ID margin, Kate, because this to me was absolutely stunning. Look at this party ID margin among African Americans. At this point in Trump term number one, Democrats had a 63-point advantage. That is absolutely fallen. Look at where it is now. A double-digit shift away. Democrats, of course, still have the advantage, but it's a 12-point shift to the Republican Party. And I look back through Gallup's records. They sent me their records. And this, in fact, lead that Democrats have is actually smaller than any lead from 2006 to 2021. So Democrats are leading. But again, we're talking about chipping away. Republicans are chipping away.
Yeah, he's right. I mean, it is a long-standing trend. One of the ironies of the 2020 election, right, was that for all the screeching about election fraud and a Venezuelan fraud algorithm that had supposedly infiltrated the tabulation systems and Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and all that nuttiness January 6th, there were actually some, let's say hopeful signs for the Trump era Republicans in the data that they kind of weirdly overlooked, especially insofar as minority demographics trending pretty discernibly toward Republicans in a way that would have been radically counterintuitive if you had listened to any of the prevailing media narratives during that first Trump term, where we were in this nightmarish white supremacy, apocalypse. And so, so Trump, and his, acolytes would scream, "Oh, we're going to go out. There's obviously this decisively corrupting voter fraud in the metro, in the four inner cities in the swing states. So Milwaukee, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Detroit. But I did a big actually newspaper feature on that for the New York Daily News. And when you looked into like the granular data, Trump was overperforming in the inner city precincts in a Milwaukee and a Detroit compared to 2016. And Biden was actually underperforming Hillary and Obama. But Biden still won over the states overall, like in Michigan, because he was like drastically
because he was
performing
gaining
in the affluent suburbs. Particularly the affluent suburbs, across the board. But in like the more impoverished, actual inner city areas, there was an uptick that was pro-Trump. But like the Republicans didn't talk, like the MAGA people never talked about it because they were so consumed by this like overarching hallucinatory election fraud narrative that like these data never impinged on them. But like this is a continuation of that trend, I would say, which Harry is elucidating there.
So I think this is a thing that has gone on for 20 years. Having covered campaigns for a long time, it's been a long time source of frustration that we have reporters have fixed ideas about who votes for whom, and they just never change, right? Even though there's constant change in which demographics go which way, right? So you mentioned that the Republicans aren't talking about these gains very much. The Democrats also aren't talking about their gains in the affluent suburbs, right? Like, they've become almost dominant.
I've talked about it because I talked about it. That's like the center of power in their party now. So that's where you would expect their priorities to be centered on, legislatively, politically, and otherwise. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a longstanding observable trend. I mean, it coincides with the Republic. It's like a flip from 20 years ago, where the Republicans are more lower class oriented, or they're down now. They're like this. Their center of power is farther down on the scale of like the socio-economic continuum now. Yeah, as opposed to 2004 or something. It doesn't mean that the Republicans are a working class
1992
party.
even.
Yeah. It doesn't mean like the Republicans are like a thoroughly working class party or something, which I remember Ted Cruz declaring after which election was it? Either 2020 or 2024. I think it was after 2024, which is like an overstatement of the case. It's just in terms of the trend lines. That's what's going on with the Democrats becoming relatively more affluent, Republicans becoming relatively less affluent. So you would expect that to also go hand in hand with some movement in their favor amongst the more socioeconomic downscale minority demographics who kind of just relate more to the Republicans on a visceral, instinctive level, and probably are consuming the podcasts and so forth, Rogan, what have you, and yeah.
There's another thing that's going on.
Every presidential election cycle, there's always a pundit trope. There are no swing voters, so don't even bother going to try to talk to them. Nobody's actually trying to make up their mind. There are no swing voters. Like that's always like this kind of like pundit cliche every cycle. Meanwhile, if you actually go out, as I do every cycle, and like just talk to random people at Walmart or something, there's plenty of swing voters because they're not tuned in like Harry Enton day in and day out to the nitty gritty of like what's going on.
There are tons of swing voters, and the only reason that we don't see more is because people consume tons and tons of media that tells them they fit into a preordained slot. There are certain things that are true. Male turnout helped Trump. Female turnout helped Democrats last time around. But within that sort of broad parameter, there were subcategories like affluent white men tend to vote for Democrats now.
Yeah,
right?
Or with a graduate level education or something.
Right, graduate level education, right? And there's an even weirder thing that's going on with...
And women, forget it. That's like 90-10 or something Democrat.
Yeah, right.
Meaning affluent white women or
women.
Highly educated white women.
Especially
single
30.
women. Yeah. And especially single. Married, less so. Single, much more Democrat.
Yeah, but as you start going farther down the age scale, we're getting things now where there's like less and less party affiliation the closer you get to 18, and then at 18 and 19, people there's almost a majority neither position with young people, right? Like there isn't the thing that happened a long time ago where we assumed young people voted for Democrats, right? That's not true at all anymore. They may not vote for Republicans, but they're all over the place politically. And so
it's not like Obama 2008, which
right.
I was right in the middle of, I'll admit, as like a 19, 20-year-old, where it was sort of, I mean, what you think, like your friend on your college campus was going to be voting for John McCain?
Right.
No, not so much. It was Obama for sure. Even like amongst like kind of like Republican, I mean, even like the Republicans that I knew, because I would always like, do collaborations and stuff with like the college Republicans. Even they were kind of like not, if they were voting for McCain, it was like as unenthusiastically as they possibly could. But even like the people who might be more attracted to the college Republican program, they couldn't convince to vote for McCain. It was just Obama all the way.
Yeah.
In 2024, I wrote something for Newsweek about what I sort of was detecting was the quintessential swing voter or undecided voter that I was encountering. So I went to Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and so forth. It wasn't a swing voter that was necessarily deciding whether to vote for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. It was a voter that was deciding whether or not to vote at all.
Right.
And if they were deciding whether or not to vote at all, almost invariably, I found, like 9 times out of 10, they were going to be voting for Trump.
Right. Right. And that's an extension of remember there was that weird stat,
including minorities. Like I remember I talked to all day I spent basically talking to minorities at a Walmart one day, and every voter of that profile that I spoke to, they were undecided. They were like, "What's the deal with this Kamala thing? How did she even get in there? I might vote, I might not. I don't care that much. If I do vote, I'm voting for Trump." Things were basically okay when he was last in power.
Yeah. In 2016, there was a really weird.
Good job to the producer.
There we go. Our mystery producer comes through again. What's the name of the piece so people can read it?
Scroll up.
Undecided Pennsylvania voters told me what they really think about Harris and Trump.
I mean, that's kind of a lame headline. I did not write that, but anyway.
Yeah. Most of the time, the writer does not write the headline unless they're the editor of the site. In 2016, one of the reasons I thought Trump could not win for sure is because I got sat down by a Democratic pollster in the convention who showed me the disapproval ratings and the historical disapproval ratings of other candidates and said there is no way a candidate with disapproval ratings this high is ever going to win a national election. And the thing that I didn't think of, that he didn't think of, is that among the 19% of voters
who disliked both Hillary and Trump,
it was almost a 2-to-1 margin for Trump. And that's an extension of what you're talking about, right? Among the people who are deciding whether or not to vote.
Trump's an asshole, but I'm voting for him anyway, voters.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He's getting a lot of those votes, right? It's traditional politics that is turning people off, which is fascinating. So there are all these trends that are going to come into play. Now, you mentioned Barack Obama. Let's see what his post was on this decision before we move on to the indictments of the week in a moment.
By the way, I mean, the Republic. However, we were talking about like maybe some positive portents for Republicans politically in the long run, perhaps, or at least in a diversification of like traditional racial allegiance in terms of how it kind of coexists with partisan affiliation. But I mean, the Republicans are on course to get totally swamped in these midterms. So, I mean, look at pretty much every data point for every election that's been held in the past year. Special elections, the gubernatorial elections last year, even like local. I mean, a Democrat won a state legislative seat that that contains Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, they're gonna get wiped out.
That's why they're rushing to kind of consolidate. I mean, like Republicans in particular are rushing to consolidate whatever gains they can cling to now, while they still can.
Right. And it probably it won't be enough. But it's still interesting. Here's Barack Obama.
The Republicans reminded us very frequently, not unjustifiably, in 2022 when the gas prices were going up because of the Biden policy on Russia sanctions and whatever. That this is Biden inflation. Well, I mean, everybody can drive around and look at the gas prices nowadays, and that's because Trump, in his own blinkered brain, decided to randomly launch a war with Iran. So there's nobody else who really gets the blame for that.
Michael, do you want to read the first graph here of Obama's thing?
Okay, should I do the Barack Obama voice?
Yes.
Good evening. Let me be clear.
He does always say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The notion that I noticed he always says the notion that, I mean, not that you can't say the notion, but it was just a verbal tick I've always noticed. Anyways, today's Supreme. So when was this? Wednesday or yesterday?
Wednesday.
Okay. This is April 29th, 2016. Today's Supreme Court decision effectively guts a key pillar of the Voting Rights Act, freeing state legislatures to gerrymander legislative districts to systematically dilute and weaken the voting power of racial minorities, so long as they do it under the guise of, quote, partisanship rather than explicit, quote, racial bias. And it serves as just one more example of how a majority of the current court seems intent on abandoning its vital role in ensuring equal participation in our democracy and protecting the rights of minority groups against majority overreach. The good news is that such setbacks can be overcome. We shall overcome. And Trump does, we shall overcome. But that will only happen if citizens across this country who cherish our democratic ideals, like my good friend Sherrod Brown, who I'm going to campaign for in Ohio. I mean, he's going to, like, all these people who cherish our democratic ideals, the lamest people like Gretchen Whitmer, continue to mobilize and vote in record numbers, not just in the upcoming midterms or in high-profile races, but in every direction and every level. Well, thank God the democracy isn't fully destroyed, which is what we were warned was going to happen if Trump got back in. So we're now like, maybe there's like some, regrettably democracy undermining measures as they see it, but like the democracy itself is like pretty much still intact. It's just like we got to like worry about Sam Alito.
Yeah, and the way the ruling is written, it seems to say almost the opposite of what Obama said. That the new test was going to be, basically that the federal government can intercede only when there's strong evidence that racial discrimination was employed in the drawing of the map. So I don't know.
It's kind of like, remember that there was a fairly landmark gun control ruling a few years ago on gun regulation, gun policy that was authored by Thomas. I think it was in the same batch of rulings actually with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So that would have been 2022, if I'm not mistaken. But that gun control ruling, I can't remember the name of it now. Either producer can look it up. It's kind of a wild ruling, frankly, where Clarence Thomas goes back to like colonial America. I think he might even go back to like England in the Middle Ages or something to find precedent for the various arguments that he's making. But the effect of it was simply to require that states, if they're going to impose requirements for a handgun permit or gun permitting, they have to be kind of like standardized. So there were some states whose regimens were basically invalidated and had to be revised, but then like a bunch of others whose regimens complied with the Supreme Court's new test, and yet the commentary, like the instant blithering headlines at the time were like, this right-wing court, it's going to be allowing mass shootings to break out in every school in the nation, and like you can no longer control gun provision at all. It was just like totally inimical to what was actually written in the ruling. And even Kavanaugh added like a little addendum or like a concurrence where he's like, just so everybody's clear, this does not affect. This ruling does not in any way inhibit the ability of states to regulate who is permitted to purchase a firearm. We're just calling for more standardization of like the approval or disapproval criteria.
Yeah, and this is something that we can come back to, if we can get to your thing again. It's just you can say whatever you want in analysis now or commentary. It doesn't have to strongly coincide with facts in any way. You can just say this means X, and
here's what. Oh, sorry, this was Alito's concurrence. I stand corrected. I thought it was Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh also did a second concurrence. Okay, so they both did concurrences. This is what Alito said about that supposedly apocalyptic ruling that we were told at the time in June of 2022 had abolished the ability to regulate, machine guns being, sold at the corner store. Our holding decides nothing about who may lawfully possess a firearm or the requirements that must be met to buy a gun, nor does it decide anything about the kinds of weapons that people may possess. Then Kavanaugh says the court's decision does not prohibit states from imposing licensing requirements for carrying a handgun, and, quote, does not affect the existing licensing regimes that are employed in 43 states. So I added at the time, so like if you live in Illinois or Colorado, like not known to be like necessarily bastions of freewheeling, free for all
ownership,
although Colorado may be a little bit different, but Illinois for sure. The gun control regimens were unaffected. It was about something that got screwed up in Connecticut.
Yeah, and this is just the phenomenon of fundraising narratives bleeding into the news, right? So you have interest groups that are freaking out about something, and so that becomes part of the way.
And I'm sorry, the right-wing jurists are much more interesting and incisive to read than the current left liberal jurists. Like Ketanji Brown Jackson is like, she's just hysterical. I don't want to be too rude, but not the most.
I mean, her stuff on speech is just like, it's like beyond belief.
I mean, Kagan can write a good, a decently argued, well-written decision occasionally, but. I mean, maybe this is going to be seen as racially insensitive or something, but Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Actually, Sotomayor on now and then has a decent point to be made, point to make on like civil liberties type issues or due process. But by and large, the right wing jurists on the court are just much more they're just attractive in like the level of thought that they're giving to the subject, in my experience.
I guess, yeah. I don't know if
like Gorsuch always has an interesting take. You can never quite pin him down. He's got like this idiosyncratic affinity for the Native Americans out in Colorado and like the Native American rights, and he's like kind of whenever that issue comes up, it always like throws a monkey wrench into the whole Supreme Court distribution of power, because he's going to side with the Native Americans because he has like he wrote a whole book basically on like Native American law, and he sides with like the sovereign rights of Native Americans to not be necessarily required to do stuff by the federal government and so on and so forth. It's just more interesting, I find.
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's just like this rote, we got to like preserve the same legal framework from 1965 for all eternity, or else, blacks are going to be, put in chains.
Right. Yeah. No. And, this whole thing, the practice of drawing like weird spaghetti shaped districts just so that you can have, a member of Congress who's of a certain color. Like, I don't know. I think that's a little silly. But
I mean, get rid of the Congressional Black Caucus too. Get rid of any racially specific caucus. They're not needed anymore. You're not telling me that like the Black Democrats have no other venue to gather without declaring a specifically racialized caucus for themselves. Okay, I would maybe understand the logic for it 60 years ago, but now it's just this anachronism that then allows them to bloviate at their little press conferences and talk like, Jesse Jackson or something.
Right. Yeah.
R.I.P.
Right. Yep. Yeah, here's Trump's truth about this. Let's quickly move on to the next issue, though. Let's look at number 11, which is the Comey indictment. If you haven't read this, when I go to read the indictment of a former FBI director, I'm expecting, I may crack open a whole new beverage.
Yeah, you're gonna settle in. You're gonna maybe put your feet up, get into the easy chair.
Right. There must be a lot in it.
Puff on a pipe. Like you're getting ready for a good hour and a half or so of some reading.
All right. So on or about, and it starts like this. Count one. On or about May 15th, 2025, in the Eastern District of North Carolina, the defendant James Bryan Comey Jr. did knowingly and willfully make a threat to take the life of and to inflict bodily harm upon the President of the United States, in that he publicly posted a photograph on the internet social media site Instagram, which depicted seashells arranged in a pattern making out 8647, which a reasonable recipient who is familiar with the circumstances would interpret as a serious expression of an intent to do harm to the President of the United States. In violation of Title 18, blah, blah, blah. Count two, on or about May 15th, 2025, James Bryan Comey Jr. knowingly and willfully did transmit in interstate and foreign commerce a communication that contained a threat to kill the president, Donald Trump, specifically by posting a photograph, et cetera, same stuff. Forfeiture notice is hereby given that all right, title, and interest in the property described herein is subject to forfeiture.
And this is just formulaic stuff.
This is
copy and pasted.
This is copy pasted at the bottom, and then how much farther does it go? But you're done. That's it. That's the whole thing. And this is all over an Instagram post, and we might as well just go straight to the Colbert interview, where Stephen Colbert asks Comey about this. This is let's see, Sod 8, if we can.
What is a sod?
Sound on tape.
Okay. I just heard you hear you say that and have no real understanding of what it means.
Here, but is this Instagram?
Instagram.
You grammed this. You were walking down the beach. What happened? You were walking down the beach and you saw this on the beach?
Yeah, my wife and I, Patrice, were walking on the beach and saw those numbers in shells on the beach. And
you didn't do this. Somebody else did this.
Yeah, somebody else did it. We were on a walk preparing for this week to roll out of my book.
Yep.
She looked at it and said, "Why'd someone put their address in the sand?"
All right.
And then we stood at it, trying to figure out what it was. And she'd long been a server in restaurants. And she said, "You know what I think it is?
Yeah.
I think it's a reference to restaurants when you would 86 something in a restaurant."
Right, it's off the menu.
Yeah. I said, "No, I remember when I was a kid, you'd say 86 to get out of a place. This place stinks. Let's 86 it."
Right. I was a bartender. You would 86 a customer if they were getting drunk. Like, let's 86 them. Let's like give them a low proof alcohol, something like that. Yeah.
And so I said, I think it's a clever political message. And she said, "You should take a picture of it." I said, "Sure." And then she said, "You should Instagram that." And boom.
Well.
All right.
Now, remember I told you last week when we were talking about the SPLC indictment that you can never put it past the Trump DOJ to screw something up that might otherwise have some valid investigative impetus, but because they're such a clown show that they're inevitably going to spoil whatever might be legitimately investigated about the subject matter. I mean, could we have gotten a more perfect representation of that a week later?
This is the ultimate version of that. And let's get out some of the other contemporaneous videos. Let's do number 5. This is Trump being asked if he thought Comey's post really endangered his life. SOT 5. And then after that, we'll just do 6 quickly, which is Comey's response.
Do you really think that he was endangering your life or threatening your life with that?
Well, if anybody knows anything about crime, they know 86. You know what 86? It's a mob term for kill 'em. You know, you ever see the movies? 86 'em. The mobster, one of his wonderful associates, 86 'em. That means kill 'em. It's I think of it as a mob term. I don't know. People think of it as something having to do with disappearing, but the mob uses that term to say when they want to kill somebody, they say 86, the son of a gun. I'm trying to keep the language nice and clear. They don't use that term, son of a gun. They use another term. But that's a mob term for kill 'em. Yeah.
But do you really think your life was in danger? Because
Probably. I don't know. You know, based on what I'm
Boom,
seeing,
acquittal.
the people like Comey have created tremendous danger, I think, for politicians and others. Comey is a dirty cop. He's a very dirty cop. He cheated on the elections. He tried to help Clinton, as you know.
Okay, so when Trump hems and haws, when he's asked by Caitlin Collins, who is otherwise kind of annoying, but this was the right question to ask in this moment. Did you actually think that your life was in danger as a result of this Instagram post?
Yeah, you got to say yes, absolutely.
Okay, bam, instant acquittal. Throw the thing out, and can we just move on with this already? You're not going to nail Comey on anything, I guess. How about devoting some of our tax dollars to something that's that improves society somewhat?
Also, I'm pretty sure it's not a mob term. I'm pretty sure it's like a stalking term. Like it was a code for.
I thought it was some social media thing where like kids would say, I don't
no,
know.
no, this goes back way like a long time ago to like I think like loading shelves and stuff like that, or restaurants also use the term.
I've done a lot of Sopranos rewatches. I have never heard any character say 86.
You've heard them say whack, right?
Whack,
yeah.
Sleep with the fishes. I don't think they said that actually, but
yeah, 86. I don't think so.
Take care of them. Handle it.
Yeah. So let's look at that video from Comey. This is his video response.
Well, they're back. This time about a picture of seashells on a North Carolina beach a year ago. And this won't be the end of it. But nothing has changed with me. I'm still innocent. I'm still not afraid. And I still believe in the independent federal judiciary. So let's go. But it's really important that all of us remember this is not who we are as a country. This is not how the Department of Justice is supposed to be. And the good news is we get closer every day to restoring those values. Keep the faith.
This is why the second Trump administration blows so much. They're now forcing us to side with James Comey, first and foremost on First Amendment grounds, because they couldn't nail him on anything else. And so they cook up this cockamamie Instagram post prosecution by, again, venue shopping to Eastern District of North Carolina, just like they did with the Alabama thing with SPLC. And Comey's just right. I mean, like, he's substantively correct that this could not conceivably constitute a crime, except if you are serving as a loyal lackey of President Donald J. Trump, and your highest priority in terms of public office and public policy is simply to do his kind of like, petulant bidding. I mean, isn't there anything else that maybe could be worth your while in terms of your deployment of public resources? Is it all about just getting this like petty, tit for tat on behalf of the principal? Don't you have any like higher aspiration in terms of how you want to exercise power? Apparently not. It's just so lame.
So, okay. I do think the First Amendment of James Comey was totally legitimate.
The first indictment.
Yeah, the first indictment of Comey. Comey, for people who don't remember, was leaking stuff about Russiagate to the news media
after he was fired.
After, well, yes, but even before he was fired, he brought in the Daniel Richman and gave him a government designation so that he would be clear to look at material. And then Richman then spoke to the media on his behalf.
Right. Where's the crime there?
Well, it's leaking. I mean,
if he's the FBI director, he has the authority to designate somebody a rightful recipient of certain information.
Okay, does that
wasn't that guy? He was a Columbia law professor, right? Wasn't he like
he was a Columbia law
special
professor.
government employee or something?
Yeah, he was a special government employee, but he brought somebody into the FBI.
But that's a political problem, Matt. Why is every dispute have to be settled through the apparatus of criminal law? This is my whole problem with the Trump prosecutions. While he was out of power, and I was warning the Democrats who were high on their own supply that, the minute they get back, the Republicans get back in power, they're going to come right after you using these same sleazeball Jack Smith tactics. So
yeah, but this
I don't think it's clear cut that the first one was legitimate either, and this one's even more farcical.
Well, I'm sorry, I disagree. If leaking is a felony criminal offense, and he definitely leaked, and he leaked repeatedly, and he not only leaked repeatedly, he did it systematically. I don't
know. But you're saying he leaked when he was FBI, both serving FBI director and then former FBI director?
Yes. Yeah. There's an IJ report about it.
How can you leak when you're a former government employee?
Because he still had some of the material. When he left, and
his personal effects.
No, they weren't his personal effects.
I just don't understand what. Okay, so you don't think there's any ambiguity there? You think that he would have been locked up, no problem? I don't think so. I just don't. Okay, so even if you object to some of the conduct in terms of him disseminating information, around the time that he was fired in 2017 or whatever may have happened, why is that an issue that has to ipso facto be resolved through the application of punitive criminal law? This is why I'm an instinctive defense attorney, no matter who the target is, Jeffrey Epstein or James Comey, or fill in the blank.
I'm sorry, if Chelsea Manning's got to go to jail for leaking material, then James Comey.
But I was opposed to that too.
You were?
Chelsea Manning being prosecuted? Yes, I actually attended her trial.
All right, how about
Assange?
But
Ellsberg.
So
Donald Trump, when he was charged under the Espionage Act, so I like to think I'm pretty consistent about this stuff.
Okay, so nobody should be ever be put in jail for.
I mean, why
for leak?
Why do we want the government to even have this power? It's like a bogus power to begin with.
For leaking classified material.
I mean, what? So now we're all supposed to revere the classification regimen? It's like a total joke. It's so arbitrary, and it's so nebulous that it allows these kind of circumstantial, politically expedient prosecutions because the standards are never evenly applied.
Well, I mean, look.
It brings you joy to the idea of throwing people in jail for receiving or leaking classified information?
Well, especially if you're doing so to imply that somebody's guilty of a crime.
So then go after him politically. It's a political dispute.
Well, it's
non-judiciable.
Justiciable is the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
It is justiciable, Michael. And the reason you go after a crime like this is because there's more underneath it with Russiagate. This is it's a first layer of about 19 different illegalities that went on in that case. From illegal surveillance of people to illegal use of FISA against members of the campaign to leaking that material, by the way.
Okay, so to get to the truth of Russiagate, we have to say, oh yes, Mr. Federal Prosecutor, use my taxpayer dollars to spuriously cook up indictments of people that Donald Trump doesn't like and throw them in jail. Come on. There's other ways to extract that material, Matt, without having to resort to the supreme authority of our prosecutorial overlords to tell us what the truth is. I mean, wasn't Tulsi supposed to be giving us all this crap? What happened with that?
Yeah, but Michael, this is how you do political investigations. You find somebody who's guilty of something and you prosecute them for it, and then you roll them into the next thing.
That was the Stalinist.
Come on, Michael. This is every
show me the man and I'll show you the crime. That's what they're doing with Comey. Well, it's just a coincidence that once they screwed up the first one, they decided to prosecute him over Instagram. It's show me the man and I'll show you the crime. Wasn't that the Soviet?
Michael, there's no crime in Russiagate?
I don't know that. I mean, I think there's stuff that's like politically criminal in terms of being objectionable. I don't know that what James Comey did was criminally actionable. No.
So you don't think illegal?
I think it's a political problem. That was my focus. Not saying, let's get into the ring and just start bringing indictments against each other for all perpetuity. This is what I was going after the Democrats for with Jack Smith and that woman in Georgia and all this other nonsense. Alvin Bragg. That was Trump being the target of Democrats saying, "Show us the man, we'll show you the crime," and they found bogus crimes to whip up. And now that's a difference. And Trump said, "I'm your retribution. Elect me president again, and I will do what was done to me on your behalf because I'm the avatar of the nation." Like JFK was our slain father figure. Trump is now the martyr, semi-martyred martyr figure for his constituency. And so now they did it to me. Now we'll do it to Comey. That's what they're doing. And no, I don't support it. And I don't think it can be justified by appealing to some higher principle around Russiagate disclosure. What did we get what Russiagate disclosure have we got?
But it's not Russiagate disclosure. Russiagate has to be prosecuted. If Watergate was prosecuted, we got to prosecute Russiagate. It's the same thing. It's illegal surveillance and election manipulation.
To me, it's a political problem. Not a criminal justice problem. I don't know why that's so controversial now. Penalize the perpetrators of Russiagate politically. That's what I was calling for.
So you wouldn't
penalize throw them in prison. Like there's a high bar for putting someone in a cage for years. That's my belief.
So you wouldn't have put any of the Watergate conspirators in prison?
I don't think. I mean, I would have to go look in greater detail, but no, I don't think so. I mean, there was like a ticky-tack thing pretty much in terms of the
break-in. But bugging the
they didn't even bug it. They didn't even end up bugging it. It was just
they did
goofball. They did not actually end up wiretapping. They never wiretapped the DNC office and received wiretapped communications. It was bungled.
They broke into the office and put a bug in there.
I know, but I'm saying the bug was never set up, so they never received wiretap communications.
Just because they got caught, it doesn't
mean
yeah.
I mean, to the guys who actually broke in, fine. I mean, if it's a breaking and entering, okay, so that's more clear cut. But this is almost like a political prosecution with Comey.
Yeah, Michael, listen to me just for
I don't know that Nixon ought to have been prosecuted for that necessarily.
Maybe not Nixon, but certainly all the way up to John Mitchell approved this operation. And if you're approving an operation to perform a whole campaign of dirty tricks that includes illegal surveillance, sending prostitutes at people,
I'm just not gung-ho, Matt, about sending people to prison. I don't know. Maybe it's a character flaw.
Okay. I mean, personally, I think the intelligence community shouldn't be involved in deciding who gets to be president.
I agree, but they've been doing that for ages. They supported Kennedy over Nixon. And so, let's get a political solution of some kind rather than thinking we're going to solve the problem by putting some, patsy in jail, and then.
But he's not a patsy. They did it.
James Comey is a patsy of Donald Trump. The only reason that now these sequential prosecutions of James Comey is because Trump hates him. You're telling me it's just it's some objective evaluation that was made of James Comey? Matt, why was he just prosecuted this week for the Instagram post?
Because they
coincidentally.
Well, the Instagram post is stupid.
Yeah, but why was it brought?
Because he's on a vengeance tour. There's
there you go.
Yeah, but Michael, there are real crimes, and then there are crimes that are not real. The 8647 thing is not a real crime. The stuff that went on in Russiagate, where they cook up phony investigations and they send informants into places and they pay them out of the Office of National Assessment.
So let's further empower the national security state to address that, because that's what you're doing. When you're saying these guys need to be prosecuted, that's meaning
we're using
delegate more punitive powers to the National Security Division of the DOJ to address this political problem. That's what you're doing functionally. And I just you know what that resulted in? When Trump was out of office, that resulted in the National Security Division of the DOJ thinking that they were going to be the ones to enforce the Presidential Records Act. Give me a break. I mean, this is out of control. So no, I'm not going to participate in validating any aspect of it unless you can show me concrete, solid proof that a particular statute was violated by Comey, which I don't think was at all established.
But he
by that
100%
indictment.
violated the leaking statute. 100%.
What's the leaking statute?
You can't leak
The Espionage
classified
Act?
information.
You mean the Espionage Act?
No, leaking classified information.
Which statute?
False statements, obstruction of congressional proceeding.
I remember him being indicted for false statements.
Yeah,
And that's what he was indicted for. It was an obstruction of the congressional proceeding from 5 years ago that they snuck in right under the 5-year statute of limitations.
Yeah, but the false statement was that he had not authorized somebody to leak to the media.
But Matt, that was like indicting George Papadopoulos for getting a date wrong. That's what they're doing. That's the vengeance tour.
No, it's not. It's totally different.
Here's the counts. False. He wasn't even charged in the first indictment for leaking. He was charged for count 1, false statements within the jurisdiction of the legislative branch of the United States government, and count 2, obstruction of a congressional proceeding. There's no leaking statute because they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks with the guy. Hence now them resorting to an Instagram process.
Michael, there's a 79-page IG report about this that concludes that that there were sweeping offenses up and down by Comey and his office.
And there's a 2-page indictment from September 25th, 2025, which is bare bones, brought by one of these lackeys who was like a 35-year-old that Trump put in because I guess she's attractive as like an interim prosecutor. And it was a farce and got thrown out instantly. And it didn't even get to any potential like legitimate wrongdoing around leaking and so forth. It was just a patina to prosecute Comey. So no, I don't support that. I actually will, stick by the ethos that it was a Stalinist vow to say, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. And because that's what they're doing with Comey, just like, Democrats did in a more diffuse way, did with Trump when he was out of office. So I don't support either of it.
I mean, under those standards, Michael, you can't prosecute any scandal.
Yes, you can. I mean, you can't, Matt. You can't say, "Look, we don't like Comey, therefore let's find a crime we can snag him on." That you can't do. You can see a scandal erupt, and you could see potential criminality that's investigating, and you can find evidence that maybe implicates.
I'm gonna read from the end of the IG report. Comey's unauthorized disclosure of Comey's unauthorized disclosure of sensitive law enforcement information about the Flynn investigation merits similar criticism. In a country built on the rule of law, it is of utmost importance that all FBI employees adhere to the department and FBI policies, particularly when confronted by what appear to be extraordinary circumstances and compelling personal convictions. Comey had several other lawful options available to him to advocate for the appointment of a special counsel. What was not permitted was the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive investigative information obtained during the course of FBI employment in order to achieve a personally desired outcome. The OIG has provided this report to the FBI and to the DOJ for action they deem appropriate. This did not come from a Trump-appointed IG. This came from IGs who've been working there for.
Fine. They're saying, merit similar criticism, they say. So they're saying Comey's conduct merits criticism. They're not saying it merits being thrown to prison for several decades. They're saying he violated or that he acted in a way that was, quote, inconsistent with department policy, not inconsistent with the Espionage Act or any other statute.
The Espionage, this isn't the Espionage Act. This is leaking.
This is an internal departmental review.
And the leaking is just the top of the that's just the surface of the bad behavior. I mean, underneath this, there's a whole galaxy of improper behaviors that was conducted by Comey's FBI during that period. Everything from
Okay, so I guess I guess we'll have to see if Kash Patel does anything that can be deemed inconsistent with departmental policy, and then we'll see if there's a galaxy of underlying conduct for which he can be criminally prosecuted. Because that's going to be the tit for tat. Is that the world, the society we want to live in? I don't think so. I mean, we can call Kash Patel and James Comey a piece of shit and politically, repudiate their tenures as FBI director without thinking that the way to resolve these squabbles is to get into this endless vendetta where we're marshaling the long arm of punitive criminal law. It's a road paved to hell.
I'm sorry, RussiaGate has to be prosecuted. I totally disagree. I think that was, in the pantheon of American political scandals, especially ones that involve the intelligence community, meddling in domestic politics.
RussiaGate has to be prosecuted. It's too vague. You got to show me the precise crime, the precise evidence, and what statute it violated.
Well, I mean, there's a long list of stuff. I mean, they had 26 different people under surveillance, before the election. They improperly obtained, a FISA on a Trump aide, which was used then to obtain information about everybody that person talked to.
I remember that IG report.
So it's exactly the same thing as Watergate, except it's on a much larger scale, and that doesn't even include the stuff that came after. I mean,
So who precisely do you believe ought to be prosecuted in 2026 for RussiaGate related offenses other than Comey?
Brennan, for sure.
For what specific conduct?
Falsifying an intelligence report.
Falsifying an intelligence report. So, and what statute would that violate in the criminal code? Just like a general fraud thing? Again, like, I don't understand why we can't politically repudiate Brennan for falsifying an intelligence community document. Really, that's now grounds for a criminal prosecution? No, I think it's grounds to show that he was the leader of this little cabal where they were thinking that they were the heroes of democracy and had to thwart this Russian agent or something, and that's discrediting enough.
I mean, I think the people who falsified the WMD intelligence assessment, although that was a different kind of document, I think there should be penalties for those. Yeah, I do, and because
I'm not for expanding the domain of what we consider a penalty that has to be doled out in terms of the application of criminal law. I think there's stuff that has to remain in the domain of political disputation. Otherwise, it's an endless cycle.
I don't know, man.
The Democrats already breached with Trump with those bogus 4 prosecutions. I was the guy who was coming out and saying, "Look, wait, Trump." I mean, you could make an argument that Trump did technically violate the Espionage Act or the Presidential Records Act, and then you could, repeat the cliche, "No one's above the law," because, some lawyer could come up with an argument that he did technically violate the precise wording of the statute. But no, I was against all of that, and that was called, pro-fascist or wanted to re-empower Trump, ironically enough, and. No, I think I was correct in opposing that on principle, because that was all stuff that was nowhere near egregious enough in terms of the actual criminal violation that could be alleged, that it couldn't be dealt with in the realm of political disputation, meaning don't vote for Trump, oppose him, campaign against him, criticize him, mock him, pillory him, whatever you want to do. But the idea that we have to resurrect an ancient civil rights statute from the Civil War and the Espionage Act, which they used against Assange and Ellsberg and Manning, to go after Trump, that's preposterous. And I'm sorry, I have a similar mindset with these other, fanciful prosecutions that people want to bring against Trump's personal enemies.
Michael, you think a little bit much of yourself sometimes.
I probably do.
You maybe want to respect other people's opinions. I get it that this is your opinion, but my opinion, and I
respect your opinion.
I worked on this for years, and RussiaGate is absolutely a prosecutable political scandal. I mean, if RussiaGate is not prosecutable, then nothing is prosecutable. It's as bad as it gets.
I disagree. I'm not saying I disrespect.
They falsified intelligence. They used illegal surveillance. They inserted campaign research into official intelligence reports. they used it as a pretext to start a special prosecutor investigation that could have overturned the presidency. I mean, there's so many different things going on there. If you can't prosecute that, look, we send people to jail for significant periods of time for things that, you know, to ordinary people might seem insignificant. If we're going to do that, then these people got to go to jail for committing major breaches of ethics and violations of the law. Like if you're going to send somebody to jail for 8 months for punching out his girlfriend's screen door, you got to send these guys to jail for illegally putting somebody under FISA surveillance.
Or maybe we shouldn't send the guy to prison who punched out the porch door or whatever for 8 months. Really, that seems excessive. I don't know. That's just my instinct. It's not that I disrespect your opinion of that. It's just I disagree. I mean, and like I was making a variation. Look, I mean, I'm probably full of myself. I agree, but I was making a variation of this argument when the Mueller investigation was launched. I was saying, look, you are criminalizing political disputation with this open-ended special counsel investigation, where somehow your purview via Rosenstein or whomever was to criminally investigate anybody who had a tie or a connection or the collusion.
But Michael,
so
that's the exact.
That was my problem with that. So if it boomerangs now, I'm not just going to abandon everything I was saying when the whole thing started.
But the whole point, Michael, is that they falsely generated the predicate to start that special counsel investigation, and you got to punish something in it.
Okay, so Matt, should we prosecute Donald Trump when he's out of office next time for clearly falsely predicating the Iran war on a bunch of bogus claims around imminent threat and so forth? I know a lot of people would like to. I know people would get a lot of psychic gratification from that. You could make a pretty good case that there's some fraud statute that could apply to his statements and those of administration for falsifying a lot of stuff in terms of justifying their foreign policy action. But no, I think my instinct would be the same. No, I don't think that should be prosecuted. I think that should be dealt with in the realm of political disputation.
I mean, I've talked to very good lawyers who've told me that there are things that Trump did in his second term that they would think might fall under the purview of criminal law. The Venezuela boat actions might. If we want presidents to follow the law, somebody's got to go to court. I mean, it's just the way it is. And similarly, we can't have people, making executive decisions when they're not the president of the United States, which is another something that went on in the last presidency. I just don't think we can turn a blind eye to very serious violations of law by people who aren't supposed to make any, who are surrounded by lawyers that we pay for.
I'm not saying turn a blind eye. I'm just saying that you're kidding yourself if you think that the way to direct your focus properly is to go through the route of empowering prosecutors to come up with a cockamamie case and thinking that's going to somehow solve all our political problems, because it's a nightmare waiting to happen. It's already underway. The nightmare is upon us. This is like kind of banana republic stuff. I mean, the United States is a declining empire, let's say.
The 8647 case is banana republic stuff. The other one is not.
Okay, but then how about the 8647? I mean, so what do you make of that in general? Like, what does that tell you about what the Trump administration is doing? How alarmed should we be by it? How much of a problem it is? Is it for free speech? Because, I don't know. It seems pretty consistent with the show me the man, I'll show you the crime ethos that I'm sort of suggesting is what's guiding all of this, even if you can dress it up in some kind of higher principle.
I'm saying this is a totally bullshit case. Okay. When they didn't have to, because they have real cases against Comey that they should have worked harder to make stick. They fucked up the last case. They were too stupid to take their time and develop that prosecution and do it correctly. It would have stuck if they hadn't bent the rules and with the insertion of a new, what was it, an acting AG or something like that. That's a real case. That's a real criminal case. And by the way, it's also a systematic problem. Like I can't tell you how many I've talked to a bunch of intelligence whistleblowers, including people who've actually gone to jail for years at a time, and it's a constant problem that people who leak at the lower levels get punished, sometimes rather severely, but people who leak at the higher levels, there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge arrangement by which they're all allowed to do it, and I think that's got to stop.
So one of the allegations in the Trump indictment, and it was in 2023 around the Mar-a-Lago documents case. So he supposedly possessed all these national defense documents that it was alleged he was not authorized to possess, even as a former president who had, taken materials with him out of the White House. One of the claims was that he had shown some highly classified war plans of some sort to, people who he was just hanging out with on a plane. I think it was, or in Bedminster or something, which you could say is a leak. Now, I was against that prosecution. I was saying Trump ought not to have been prosecuted for supposedly leaking this, sacrosanct national security information, because it's not an offense that's in the public interest to prosecute for a million different reasons. Even if, some aggressive prosecutor could make a technical argument about the statutory violation. First and foremost, because the classification power flows ineluctably from the executive, which Trump was, and he says he declassified it when he left. And I think that's fine, unless we want to authorize these bureaucratic factions to say what is and what isn't classified over and above democratic checks. But there are different arguments there. But like, I don't know, you can make the same sort of contention that Trump ought to have been prosecuted because he might have been technically guilty of something, depending on how the trial went. And we can't have this situation where lower level, schmucks and schlubs get prosecuted for leaking or mishandling classified information, where big time elites like Trump get away with it. I would have rejected that argument, but like, that argument could have been made. Right?
Michael,
am I crazy?
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Look, the Espionage Act, there's a reason why civil libertarians hate it. You're basically guilty of it. When they file it, they can designate anything national defense information. It's particularly ridiculous to file it with regard to a president, because a president has the ability to declassify anything at any time. And in this case, he had. But even more to the point, there is such a thing as a damaging, dangerous, illegal leak, and we do have to punish them. Would you want a CIA agent who had important information for national security? Would you want that person leaking that to Russia, for instance, like the location of our defense, nuclear codes or that sort of thing? You have to. The whole point of this is that when there are violations that really do cross the line, you do have to prosecute it. And I'm sorry, the FBI director systematically leaking information from his own investigations, so that he can influence the politics of the day. That falls under the rubric of something that the public can't stand for. We don't pay them to do that. We pay the FBI director to be surrounded by really good lawyers so that they don't do that shit. And we can't put up with that. I'm sorry.
I agree. Politically, though, I mean, that's where I don't join the clamor in terms of leaping into the endless tit for tat of criminal law as a way to resolve these problems. I just think it's a fool's errand. But again, I agree that I'm also probably crazy. Look, I have minoritarian takes on lots of stuff. So I don't know. I think the CIA should probably be abolished, don't you? I mean, so I don't know if I want to prosecute anybody to avenge their honor in terms of the proper information retention protocols of the crap they put out. Why do we even have this whole bureaucracy? Get rid of it. It's a post-World War II thing. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to get all emotional and worked up about, the inviolability of our classified documents. I just don't. I think most of it's bullshit.
But it's not just about the inviolability of classified documents. This was part of a larger scheme where all sorts of crimes were committed, and this
So
is
you're saying it
the
should be
way.
prosecuted as like a larger conspiracy.
Yeah,
like a literal conspiracy, a violation of conspiracy statute. Like, so Comey would be ideally, in your view, he would be like one of the orchestrators of the conspiracy, and the conspiracy would like have a bunch of other like sub components, and it'd be almost like a RICO thing.
Yeah, but this is the way you do it. You do it brick by brick. If there's a real case there, and this is one of the reasons why I balked at cases, the prosecutions of people like Papadopoulos, because yeah, you can prosecute him for false statements, but he's got nothing to roll to. Like there was nothing else he could tell prosecutors. There was no bigger thing.
Same with Flynn.
Same with Flynn, but in this case,
or even Roger Stone. I mean, Roger Stone, they went after him on a false statement because they couldn't nail him on what they were thinking they could nail him on.
Yes, but
some collusive conspiracy.
The reason that was a bad prosecution is because even if Roger Stone wanted to get out from under that prosecution, there was nobody he could give up. He didn't know anything.
Insofar as it would relate to some larger collusion, scheme with Russia to subvert the election.
Right.
Yeah. But you could have given up other stuff, maybe. I mean, if you want to find something, you can find it. That's why they fished out the Manafort tax stuff from like 2005.
Yeah. No, they did. I mean, should we not
Rick
prosecute
Gates,
that?
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't particularly,
I mean, I pay taxes, so it pisses me off when people don't pay taxes.
Okay. I mean, me too, I guess. I mean, I'll pretend to be outraged about that as well. I don't know, because like I objected to the whole premise of why that Mueller investigation even existed. So if they got some collateral damage with Manafort and Gates on like ancient tax stuff that nobody would have given a second thought to, if it hadn't been supposedly, tied thematically to some collusion plot that had been gripping CNN for the past year and a half. I don't know. I just think.
I don't know, Michael. You might want to spend a little more time around like prosecutors who've done things like mob cases. Like, this is the way it works.
I don't like prosecutors that much. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't.
Really?
No, I think you got to be kind of craven, and there's got to be something psychically kind of sick with you to want to dedicate your life to throwing people in prison for years. That's what I think. That's if you want to, like, what's the emotional core of like whatever is motivating here? That's it. There's got to be something twisted about you. And actually, Greenwald and I have talked about this because he was always, he was a defense lawyer. He was trying to keep people out of prison, and he always had the same sort of intuition about like there just being something like kind of fundamentally psychically sick with people who think that they're the most sterling career path they can pursue is to ensure that they can put the most people in prison for the longest number of years. I just don't.
I mean, some people have to be in prison. They just have to. Like if
not many,
very
few.
Really,
the people are actually dangerous to society, yeah, but like not some political grudge.
All right. So the person
if people have to put in state custody because they would be violent if they were let to move about freely, meaning that they would sucker punch a grandma on the bus or something, then yeah, okay. I can accept
there
that.
are lots of those people.
Tiny minority of the total prison population.
I wouldn't say that. As someone who's taught in prison, I would say that there are certainly people who don't belong there or who shouldn't belong.
I've taught in prison too, Matt.
Who don't belong there that long, but most of the people who are in there did something. No,
sure.
The drug crimes are different. I have a totally different feeling about that. But people who did shit like get behind the wheel of a car drunk and cause injury or death to somebody else, like they got to be in jail. They just like the society demands it. I mean, there's no other way around it.
My whole philosophy on incarceration is harm mitigation first. If somebody continuing to exist freely in society is deemed to be likely to cause injury or death, and the only way to prevent that is to put them into a tiny cell managed by the state, then that's something I could accept as a necessary trade-off in terms of taking that guy's civil liberties away. But that's a much my personal standard, I fully acknowledge, is not one that most people would ever agree with.
So I talked to Elliot
bar would be
Spitzer
much
about
higher
this.
in terms of
Elliot Spitzer told me there were 3 reasons you put people in jail. 1, justice for victims. 2, the thing that you just mentioned, harm mitigation. While that person's in jail, they're not going to reoffend. 3, deterrence to others who might commit similar offenses, and all those things are legitimate. Especially,
I disagree with 2 of the 3.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Justice for victims? No, I mean, I don't think justice for victims unto itself is a reason to put somebody in jail. Why? Because it's achieving some kind of psychic gratification for putting somebody in jail, meaning you're somehow affording somebody, quote, justice, which is not something tangible. It's just something emotional and visceral. Okay, put somebody in jail if they're an active threat, and the only way to mitigate that threat is to deprive them of liberty. Not because there's some victims' rights group who are highly politically influential who want the max sentences imposed on anybody who does something stupid and maybe like causes somebody to break a leg or whatever, which is bad. Okay, but no, I don't think justice for victims unto itself is at all a sufficient reason to put anybody in jail. What does that even mean? Everybody has a different definition of what justice constitutes. Is it death penalty? Is it a forfeiture of assets? It's not like just. I think that's some straightforward thing. And then deterrence, I don't think is a.
If somebody kills your child, what does it say to those people if that person is not punished? It tells them that they're not respected as citizens. Like the system.
I mean, that person probably should be punished because he's clearly a mortal threat to children. I'm not saying don't punish the guy. I'm saying remove the threat to society. I'm just saying that the grounds on which you would justify that would not be some appeal to satisfying victims. Again, I just because that's such an emotionally manipulative thing that gets invoked over and over again to enhance the punitive power of the state and to do these longer and longer sentences and 3 strikes and you're outlaws and all this crap that bloated the United States into the biggest
I'm against
prison
the 3
state,
strikes laws, but
a bigger prison state than the gulags. So,
all right, this has been today's news. Thanks very much. All right, take care, everybody.